Hello and welcome to The Blueprint. I'm your host, Marley Finnegan. And before we dig in, please click like and subscribe below. No matter where you get your podcast, it helps us to reach more people. Also, consider leaving us a small donation, whether that be $1, $5, via one of the links below. It really helps us in funding the creation of this work. And it means a lot to know that you're out there and that you like us. So let's dig in. Hello and welcome to the Blueprint Within. I am Marley Finnegan and I'm thrilled today to be joined by my new friend, Chele Isaac. She is a collaborative experiential artist, filmmaker, and a student of bioregionalism. Chele, it's beautiful to have you here today on the Blueprint.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've been fortunate enough to meet in the recent months and have some really amazing conversations. And I've had the pleasure of learning more about your lived experience and your history. And you do have a really deep history of incorporating very intentionally collaboration into your work. It's always been a seemingly prevalent focus. And I would love to know about how your childhood and how your early experiences informed this unique approach to working experientially and, how it's informed your work as an artist and filmmaker, and what led you to kind of choose this as a vocation.
I going in the Wayback Machine, which I would call my childhood. I think about childhood as being pretty much from 0 to about 7. And after that, I think we're all like thrown into the meat grinder of the world. But in those years, I lived a real old world kind of life. I'm half Lebanese. My grandmother was an immigrant in her teens, early teens, and before I went off to school, my parents were both school teachers, and so they would drop my brother and I off at my grandmother's house as the babysitter. And so my earliest memories are with a woman who really didn't speak much English. If she could speak English, she wasn't talking to me. Um, I still don't know how much English she really had, but um, but she was an amazing cook and very deeply Maronite Catholic, very involved with a very tiny church of Arab speakers, and I learned to cook with her. Basically, the long and short of it, I this is something that I just know in hindsight. I mean, at the time, I wasn't ingesting any of that, but as I've grown up and when I'm cooking with my husband, he's like, how do you just not look at recipes? And I'm like, why? I follow recipes when I bake, but you know it, it- as I've these many years of being an adult, I really thank my grandmother, who was extraordinarily poor, but she had a terraced garden in the back of her home, and it was very rocky, and my grandfather had collected rocks and created terraces going down this kind rather steep hill. And so in every terrace there was there was lettuce and mint and dandelion and God knows what tomatoes, of course. Um and again, growing up, it just I didn't think much of it, but now looking back, she baked bread for, I don't know how they decided this. Maybe she was the best bread baker, but she baked bread for everybody in the church. And I'm sure there were other things that other people were doing that were coming her way. Um, she had nothing, but was always giving, which is, I mean, I'm painting a pretty rosy picture of my grandmother, but I get to do that. And my parents were both, they met in teachers college in a small town state school in Pennsylvania, and they were both studying art to become art teachers. And they got married rather quickly because of circumstances called my older brother. And then I came along. And but my childhood was again, I didn't realize it when I was growing up that it was special, probably, to have almost no board games except Scrabble, but real clay tools. We had a kiln in our backyard. I helped my father do salt fire glazing, and we were hanging out with their art friends. So I had a pretty deep knowledge about materials and everything from paint to fibers to clay to metal smithing, and they kind of did everything. So that was my childhood. And when I went to
Wow.
college, I decided not to become an artist because that was like it was just kind of like, well, I've got that down. Why would I spend the money? As I've always been really, in some ways, pragmatic. And
Mm.
of course, then I got an art degree, but not a pragmatic decision at all, but kind of just inevitable.
So I'm really curious about, first of all, amazing to be raised with a Lebanese grandma. In my book, I worked at a Lebanese restaurant in college and adored the food and the culture and
Mhm.
just the energy around it. So, being that she didn't speak a lot of English, how did you sort of garner and understand all the various plant life on the terraces, the beautiful terraces? And was your communication through your learning how to cook just totally nonverbal? Because that's super
Mhm.
interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's something again, like I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. I mean, there's something a little terrifying. Um, I don't know if my grandfather ever said three words to me.
Mm.
He was a force. And he died when I was very young. He passed when I was 5.5, very suddenly. Um, you know, I think it's interesting. Like we think the way we grow up is universal and normal, right? And so at the time, yeah, I wasn't actively taking notes of, being with her out in the garden with a big bowl and just picking here and there and here and there, the different greens that she would put in a salad, all the herbs that she was gathering. And I don't know that I was connecting like, oh, that's why shish tastes like shish because it's got all this fresh oregano and mint in the yogurt broth, right? But then growing up, like those memories were so registered in a different part of my sensing brain. So the sense of taste and smell and the tactileness of just kind of being on her hip. Um, um, and so I treasure that. I treasure that it wasn't, and of course there have been times in my life where I'm like, why couldn't I have had professor parents and grandparents? Like, because I've got a lot of friends who come down through that lineage and they're just exposed culturally to so much growing up. And, my biggest cultural touchstones of childhood were The Wizard of Oz and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's like that shapes my entire oeuvre of art, But yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm off the track of your question in terms of how it might.
No, you're totally. I love everything you're saying, and it's funny. The Wizard of Oz was like my all-time favorite movie as a child. I was kind of keying into this idea in David Lynch's The Art Life, which I recently watched. He talks about how grateful he was that his parents didn't give him any coloring books or anything that really had a shape or a form. And it sounds like you kind of really had that same experience of just
Yeah.
this non-prescriptive way of being a child and almost like the open wide world of nature and connection to the plants and not to put words in your mouth, but your commitment to regenerative agriculture now in your life seems so full circle along with your
Yeah.
amazing career in art and as a collaborative artist. And I think that keys into my next question. You've spoken to me previously about your best friend Jack and
Hmm.
how you often collaborate experientially. And, to me, that is such a unique, like in today's day and age, in the last maybe couple decades, it's been so much more about collaboration, I think, than historically speaking through,
Hmm.
our lived experience. So, how did that begin? And can you speak to a little bit of your process in how you approach collaboration with such a close knit relationship?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I I don't have children, so I can't speak to, I know people who have them, but I don't have many of my own. And, I know that I think that I probably speak for an entire generation that before the proliferation of screens, we were just outside. We just were outside. And there just wasn't that much good stuff on TV. I mean, I do remember Gilligan's Island being probably the best thing on TV. I still think it might be the best thing that was ever on TV. But it's not that I didn't have access to any of that. I mean, I did, but I think that a collaborative sensibility, I'll say two things about that. I think that one, being in a childhood gang where we're, building dugout forts and, running as kind of wild children all summer long. I think that builds a sense of team and camaraderie that's not coming through some other channel in a corporate world of like, there's no I in team and all the kinds of, bullshitty, bewildering kinds of things that corporations think that they are. And the other thing that I'll say is I think being female has a lot to do with, and again, for me, I'll speak for myself, the collaboration seems easy. I don't know. And I'm not saying that men are megalomaniacal, maniac, egotists, but I think that women are inherently, sometimes it could be said that we have a sense of collaboration. I think that, the whole "it takes a village" thing has a lot of resonance. That understanding that going it alone, self-sustaining, a lot of that really just plays into this much broader narrative of desire, want, and keeping people hooked on a very consumerist lifestyle, right? And how that plays into being an art collaborator. I met Jack when I was 19, and he's unlike anyone I've ever met. But I could say that about a half a dozen of my very besties. He's It's always been just, I don't know, I can't explain it. We've always finished each other's sentences. We have had some of the most just decades long disagreements and fights over things. And just this morning, I was talking to him and he says, well, I've really changed my mind about this. And this is like an argument we had 23 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, I've
Amazing.
kind of come your way in thinking. And in the same conversation, I made a comment about something that he had said. And I was like, I really think you're right on that. I think that I think maybe what Jack and I both hold dear is like at this age now, it's like, wow, knowing somebody continuously that long through life is a real gift. And so when you're making something as kind of insignificant as a piece of art that's gonna, God knows where it's gonna go when I'm dead. Even when I'm alive, it's hard for me to update my website. It's like, I love making art. I love seeing something finished. But I think what I love more is looking back at it years later and being like, oh, that's what that was about. So it's almost like we're planting these seeds, not to be too metaphorical, that one would call art pieces that go into a show. And then, 7 years later, I'll say to my friend Jill, oh my God, I thought that piece was about you. This is a collaborative project. And I'm like, that was always about me. And she goes, oh my God, are you just figuring that out? So I think that art has always been a way for me to work with people I love very much. I had a 10-year project with my best friend, Amy Devine, and the conversations we started back in the 90s are still relevant, even more relevant. It's not that because the conversation never stopped. And so I think that when it comes to collaboration, it's never like on a project or we don't know the end, right? When you're truly collaborating, you don't know the end of the story. You can't see the whole thing. And is that is what drives my art practice, but it's what drives my friendships. And so, yeah, I'm fiercely committed to friendships.
Oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful microcosm as a rule, not rule, but a guiding compass for cooperative models and multinodal leadership around the fact that, disagreements rather, conflict, ambiguity are inherent in relationality. It's
Mhm.
all a part of the game. And so to be able to embrace conflict and disagreement and the ambiguity of collaboration as a critical part of the learning is
Yeah.
exactly the point. And also, more generative to the soul and fun, I would imagine too. Like
Yeah.
it's way more fun creating and ideating with others than going it alone. And yeah, so beautiful. And I would love to hear more about your career and sort of those pieces throughout your career that have been the most, maybe in this moment, since they're always iterating and changing, in this moment, sort of the most impactful for you or transformative for you over time.
Um, yeah, we might be overstating it to call my art history a career. But it is true that um I'm a collaborator inside of that too, right? So um I think that, I got a degree as an undergraduate in painting. And then shortly thereafter, because of necessity, and having to do something that would make money, my then boyfriend and I just happened upon a 4-color screen printing press. We could make t-shirts. And I mean, one thing led to another, and that tool became something that was the foundational piece of equipment for the project that I mentioned with Amy. And it was a way for us to do both, to both explore women's history and make a product that could keep the lights on. And so it was a very creative project. It was a very entrepreneurial project. And yet when we went into it, we didn't even know the word entrepreneur, I don't think. Maybe Amy did. She's always been the smart one. But it was just this very organic thing of like, she's an amazing graphic designer and artist. And so she had that skill. And I don't know, we just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other and built this small company around women's history where we were a design company, but we only did our own work and put it out in the world. And then when we wrapped that up, we got to a certain point where we didn't want it to get bigger. So we were at a point where it's like, okay, we could go on like this forever. By then I met John and my husband, and he gave us an Excel spreadsheet of how we would take on investors and go big. And Amy and I just sat down over some soup and just were like, we'd have to commit another decade. Is that what we want to do? And we just didn't, we just was like, the project itself became a working metaphor for ourselves as women. And we're like, wow, if we're gonna take our own medicine, we'd say no to this. And so we did. And it wasn't hard. And then I wanted to get to know the artists in the community of Madison. And again, John was kind of smart about that. He goes, why don't you see if you can get in the MFA program? So, because I had no idea of the university because I didn't go to school in Madison. And so I did that and I got my MFA, and it was just an amazing 3-year art residency of, again, finding new collaborative partners, making a shift more into sound and image. And, um, and so, yeah, that's kind of But and then but what I want to get to the point where the word you use, career. There's a real careerification of art that happens when you get in this case a terminal degree, right? In visual arts. And but now we've kind of manufactured a PhD in some aspects of visual art, which I find really interesting. I find that really interesting. So
There's more money to be
that's
had.
another podcast, I think. But
Yeah, if there's more money to be had, it'll be
it's
found.
well, there's no money to be had as an artist. Let me be clear.
Well, no, but to get your PhD, you have to pay them.
Well, yeah. Well, ideally you don't, but I think it's about prestige. I think again, it's playing into this other model that I don't really think fits what I identify with as being an artist.
Mhm.
Um, there's huge amounts of money being traded in the art world, obviously, and there's a whole level of market share that I can't even fathom or understand. You go to these big art fairs like Frieze and Art Basel, and it's just the wealth is just incredible.
Mhm.
So my art career, I think, has led me more or less has just been kind of a guidepost to finding finding ways to put on a show, right? Which goes back to childhood. Like I would do puppet shows for my mother just because it just wrecked her with laughter. I mean, they were so stupid. And I would, make the puppets and then bring the puppets to life. And I was just so dumb. But I think again, it's like this thing of, what would happen if we built a 9 foot tall beehive and asked people to write stories and put them in the beehive, and like it's just ridiculous kind of stuff. But then it's the poetry is in the making. So the career, how would I explain my career? My career has been to go from one thing to the next. And I would say that my work from grad school, it was very tinged with absolutely what's happening in the moment and who am I as a contemporary artist and how am I part of this conversation, and kind of a lot of talking in ways that now I find a little cringy.
Mhm.
Um, that said, I met some of the most beautiful people that are still in my life in that world, and artists who are doing deeply important and critical work.
Yeah,
My
I
yeah, my path in that has led me to a farm. Um, it led me to it led me to a project that was so frightening to me because of the exposure and the fear of failure or looking stupid. And it was kind of like going big in my backyard, kind of a show. And at one point, just like at a moment of desperation, I sat down and I just said, I need to get out of the way. And I just threw out kind of like the universe, like, um, if I get out of the way and I don't rely on old tricks, will this be okay? And that was a really huge turning point in my life and in the way I make art. That was in 2017. And it was also the birth of the farm project. Um, the film was weirdly leading me to this deep dive into some land that we own.
It's
Yeah.
so amazing. And rewinding back to when you and Amy bid adieu to that lovely, amazing project, like to feel and be with sufficiency versus like that is so feminine and beautiful to honor like the opening and closing of that without needing the growth and the sort of listening to your soul and then continuing to listen to yourself such that you surrender sort of your processes and your work and your direction to
Mhm.
the bigger the bigger meanings that flow your way is incredible. And we have spoken about a number of different amazing projects that you've done, both during your time living in Madison, as well as your transition to an entire new, wild, regenerative, beautiful property that you just inferred. And so before we get to that, I would love to roll back to 99 when you and your wonderful partner, John, purchased this now 102-year-old church,
Mhm.
which has served as a unique living space and a community gathering hub. So would love to hear about, because that seems so interrelated to your your pathway, your work.
Mhm.
I guess it's hard to call it work and these kind of formalities because it just feels like it's like been you living out loud, in the ways that you know how to do. So would love to hear more about the church and how that came for you and what the evolution of that is on and how that relates to your place at this
Yeah.
moment.
It was very serendipitous. It, Amy and I were in Chicago with our business, and then I met John, and we were doing this kind of Madison to Chicago love affair for a while, and then I moved to Madison, and Amy and I had had a studio in DeKalb, Illinois, and so we were living in Chicago and doing, design work and everything, but then we would go out to the studio to do all of our printmaking. And that building also happened to be a church. Um, and it was an old, small, neighborhood Baptist church, but it was great space and cheap space. So I have to point that out for all the artists out there. And so eventually we both made our way to Madison. We rented a space, on the east side. And that building really became kind of superfluous to our business. So I was like, I should sell it. So I sold it and I had a little bit of money to roll over to invest in another property. And I contacted a woman who just had a little tiny ad in the Willie Co-op, the Willie Street Cooperative uh, newspaper that comes out once a month. And I always saw her little ad in there. And, I just had noticed that she said, I love working with creatives. And so I was like, okay, I'll call her. And I just left a message on her machine and said, I'm an artist. I don't have that much money, but I'm looking for a space that it doesn't have to have water. It'd be great if it had electricity because I thought I could plug in a space heater. I was looking for something really rough, and I think I mentioned like I just sold an old church in DeKalb, and I need to do something within 6 months. I got a message back from her, and she said, "This is uncanny. I can't believe it. I'd love to work with you, but I missed your call because I was at a church that's going on the market." And I looked at my husband, or I think I don't know if yeah, we were married by then. And I just was like, I do not want another church, but this is too uncanny. Like, and I think I know the building. I think I know which one it is. And sure enough, it's this, right downtown, 2 blocks from the state capitol of Madison. And we walked through it, and it was just like, it was just perfect. It was like there was living space that we could use that was kind of subterranean, but with 11-foot ceilings. And like in a typical church, the kitchen is down there, but the kitchen space was huge, like an old church kitchen. And I mean, we had to build that out, but excuse me. And then in the 50s, the church had added a two-story annex, which is what I'm sitting in right now, onto the building. And as we walked through, I thought, oh, my studio could be on the second floor, and a wood shop could be on the first floor, and a computer space. And the only space I couldn't figure out what we would do with is really the glamour space of any church, which is where everyone meets in the sanctuary. And it was just beautiful. And I said, I don't know what we would do with this because I didn't see my studio in that space. I mean, it's too hard to heat, lots of reasons. But John sold his house. He had a small house on the west side, and I had this one. We just like pulled all the coins together. We bought the place, And then again, I'm going through this whole story to say, like, I had no idea what the building would be. But as time went on, just intuitively, I felt like it's important to keep that big space still open and viable
Mhm.
for I don't know what. And then things started approaching us and other small arts organizations wanting to do a fundraiser, artists wanting to have a show, artists wanting to practice dance, play music. And then a couple of my projects that were kind of big build outs, it became a space where I could temporarily do a rough draft of something I was going to install somewhere else. And so it just very organically became this place on the DL that people learned about that the crazy lady never charged anything for. It's like, and then over the past several years, as the farm has become, since COVID, the farm has really become kind of home base on a day to day. This has been a safe haven for resident artists to come and live, and so it's found its way. And again, in the rearview mirror, I look at it and I was like, oh, it's what it's always been. It's about community. It's a
Mhm.
gathering place for community, and it's a very safe place, I think.
Oh my
I
gosh.
feel like it's got good energy.
I just like my heart, the way that I feel when you speak about this, it's just it's so much service and so much beautiful service. And also I just want to comment on how beautiful it is to have a partner who so deeply believes and intersects with, the
Mhm.
intention that you had and the vision that you had. And I was going to ask mystically, like how the energy felt when you were first in it, because, buildings that have had so many people and so many things happen can have complex, mystic,
Yeah.
energetics, but it sure sounds like over time and maybe even very much from the beginning, the energy has to be incredible. And I was fortunate enough to meet you for the first time in that beautiful space. And the way that you've designed it is just so unique and inviting and immaculate and interesting, while also at the same time, you had a poetry slam happening in the sanctuary where it was, all kinds of different people gathering in community. So just want to honor the service and the beauty of all those intentions. And also, I know that the church is kind of like still shifting and changing now
Mhm.
into new other potentials. I don't know if you want to speak to any of those.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an ongoing, again, another, I feel as though it is a collaboration with someone I've known a very long time, and our friendship has really deepened in the past couple of years. And I we're hopefully working towards this place becoming home to a meditation group. Um, and what and the possibilities that it will open up if it happens. I mean, there's lots of things that need to happen for this to happen, but in my heart of hearts, I'm rooting for it. Stay tuned. But the kitchen in the lower level is a space where, I mean, I've had harvest collaborative harvest dinners with other farm folk people, and I think we had 15 people in the kitchen, and didn't feel crowded. I mean, it's just this. To me, it is. I mean, it's so cliche to say like, oh, it's the heart of the home, but um, for this group of people who are sensing sensing their way and in a very I think what's the word I want? Disciplined manner, um, focusing on finding a more humane world within the world that we're in. Um, for that group, I just, like the first thing I said to my friend was like, just imagine what would happen if we could make big meals together,
Mm.
not only within the group, but then to open that out to the community. And I mean, his eyes got huge too. And he's like, exactly. And so, what would it be to add another dimension to this group of people who are already operating in other dimensions, right? That than what we normally consider the status quo. And
My
so
gosh.
that's hopefully where this building is going. And, um,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
first too, like the idea comes to me immediately of how many times through history people have gathered in meditation in large groups with the intention of healing things and
yeah,
bringing more consciousness to certain issues and how successful. And I'm reading about that happening all around the world right now with children and various groups gathering. So I mean, absolutely. And the power of intention through food and through nourishing people, through gathering to create beauty and well-being through, things that are so intentionally raised and honored through the soil in the ways that I know you are really, really keenly aware of. And I want to talk a little bit about your evolution from, obviously this more city-centric way of being with the church and the beautiful history that you've had to really coming into this more nature-centered experience of living, and that journey of, was that also a really kismet moment in which you were sort of invited by this property to come and be together, and just honoring your relationship with that property and how that came to be.
yeah. Kicking and screaming. I did not want that. I didn't. And, my husband is a really avid biker, and the farm is nestled in the driftless. And so for, bicyclists, it's just like that's nirvana. At one point when Chicago was applying to be a host to the Olympics, the biking portion was going to come right past our driveway. I mean, it's the heart of this biking thing. And I was just like, oh, good Lord, like Little House on the no, and and I was complaining to my art friends, and they're like, "It'll pass. It'll pass." Like it's just like he'll just sell it again, And it didn't pass. The next thing I knew, like 6 years later, he comes home and he goes, "Hey, I've been looking at architects." And I was like, "Oh shit," you know. And so it was really like, thanks to John. I mean, I really think he thought it was going to be this small like getaway where he could just fix a good breakfast, get on his bike, come back 8 hours later. And instead, it's kind of become this thing of like, instead of being like elbow to elbow with my neighbors downtown, it's like I don't want to see my neighbor. So what would happen if we started protecting this? So the piece of land we bought, we've added on to it over the years to about 140 acres, which by all standards is still a very small farm, but it's bigger than a cabin getaway. And so at that point, I'm like, well, what are we going to do? And at that point, the land was being rented, had been for a long time by monocrop kind of corn beans rotation. And I got some bees, and my bees died, and I got some more bees, and then those bees died. And
Hmm.
it's like, what is going on? And it was really and this was, I mean, right now I can talk about it like it was some cohesive thing, but it was really just, in the middle of it, I'm getting a puppy, and I'm doing it like all the other things and trying to keep going as an artist and all that stuff. But I was really awakened to this whole idea around, now this is such a rambling story, Marley. I'm glad you can edit this. But the woman I got my bees from, her name is Mary Chele, and I think it's Sally. I don't know. I only know her as Mary the Bee Charmer. So I don't know if it's Sally or Chele, but anyway, Mary is just this wonderful old soul, I think, and an amazing beekeeper and organic farmer. And I she invited me down with a group of people. She said I'm gonna be placing queens. It was in April, and she just said, If you want to learn how to place a queen in a hive, come on down and I'm going to be placing bees and, whatever. And we got down there and I went with my mom and the wind was howling. I can't even tell you how hard it was to hear Mary because of the wind. And then finally she's just like, I can't do this today. The bees were agitated. It was just like, it was not a good day. And then she just yells this thing. She goes, what'd she say? She goes, can't you hear it? The earth is angry.
Ooh.
And I, it just stopped me. And because I don't know why. It's just like one of those things where, oh, I've heard these kinds of things before, but it just like dropped in that moment. It was frustrating. It was unseasonably cold. It was horrendously windy. And none of these things in and of themselves would say the earth is angry. But Mary went on to say, like, I've been outside just about every single day for 35 years, and I'm telling you, this is changing. And somehow that planted the seed for this project I was speaking about earlier that I said really changed me, a piece called The Understory. It was like like if there was a moment where the seed for that project was born, it was in that comment and thinking about it. And then having my own bees, and I had a conversation with this wonderful young farmer who's been in a farming family for since the 1850s continuously.
Wow.
And I just said, Scott, would you consider getting the chemicals off of this property? And he was looking for ways to diversify to his credit, and but we were riding in this tractor that was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars with a GPS on board that was literally driving the tractor. And it's like not one corn seed gets wasted. You get a hopper that gets stuck, you're immediately notified. You go out, you unstick the hopper, you go on. It makes a turn at the end of the field and it doesn't overlap the last. I mean, these machines are incredible. And he was talking about his father's generation and the bushels of corn per acre. And now one generation, his bushels of corn per acre. And it was just, and both he and his dad were just like, this is insane. But
Mhm.
Scott said, I have grain from 2 years ago. I'm still waiting to sell it because they're waiting for the prices to go higher, right?
Mm.
And most of this corn is going to go into gas tanks. It's not even going into mouths. And,
Right.
it's just like they're just the insanity of it. Um,
Well,
Another
and
thing, I'll go back to childhood and say I read Diet for a Small Planet when I was 14,
mm,
and it's still worth I mean, I haven't read it in many years, but I would from what I remember, it would still be worth reading. But it's that calculus in the 70s of um the amount of energy it takes to produce this amount of protein for human consumption. And
absolutely. Well, I
so
think it's worth mentioning, I think that you alluded earlier to sort of this idea of, your former work that spoke to different things being cringy. And I just kind of notate that to be in alignment with this idea of as consciousness evolves and the more and more and more you learn, the more you kind of see, I believe, everybody's inherently good, but it's just sort of these making of choices
Mhm.
that take us down pathways that maybe aren't totally in alignment with what our beliefs are or our truth are. And I'm going to circle that back around to the farming thing because, for example, monoagriculture, which for people that don't understand farming just means farming one singular thing for many years. And, the American government provided a lot of financial subsidies to
Still do.
and still do and
Yeah.
still do to farm that way because of big corporations and big business,
Hmm.
even though when you do that over time that debilitates the soil such that the soil loses the majority of its nutrients and its ability to rehabilitate itself, which is
Hmm.
a natural part of Mother Earth. So, even when we have mono agriculture, which has taken over large swaths of the country, that's not necessarily because the farmers who have been doing it for
Not
many
at all.
generations
Yeah.
want to do it that way. It's because their margins are so slim and tight often that in
Hmm.
order for them to survive as a family and as a group, that they have to make these choices, or they feel that they're sort of pigeonholed into this way of being. So
Hmm.
that kind of, really leads to the regenerative agriculture, idea, and really is a way that was stewarded for the majority of human time by indigenous people and original people. So, and I know you call your work aggressive gardening, and you've made beautiful inroads and relationships with a lot of the other farmers and farms around you. So were you successful in being able to, I believe I know the answer to this, but to change the scope of the mono agriculture nearby your property? And also, can you talk about how you took your property from being maybe more mono ag to this more regenerative, aggressive gardening that you're working with now?
Yeah. It's yeah, I think I've told you before, I'm a little allergic to calling myself a farmer because I think that that is the hardest job in the world
Mhm.
to support oneself, one's family, one's community with that work. And it's way above my pay grade. I don't, if I was suddenly flung into that in this system, like that a farmer can do that inside of this capitalistic model is unbelievable, and it's not easy. And for both my friend who was the conventional farmer, and I mean, he just said like, Shell, we've had to go big to save our own family farms. We've had to go big, and now we don't know how to get off the merry-go-round.
Right.
So the thing, and then there are other farmers his same age who I'm working with on my farm who are extraordinarily, and I'll let them speak to farming. Hopefully you'll have one of them on your show at some point. Where they are doing multiple different kinds of crops. They're looking at the soil first. They're rotating their crops, and they're still big. I mean, they are still farming, over 900 acres. That's a big operation. The little piece on our property, I'm so grateful that they'll come over and just work with 50 acres. So they rent some property, they own certain property. The ownership of land, speaking about indigenous ways, in this country anyway, it's the cost of entry is insane and it's heartbreaking. And so unless you are inside of a family that's always had some land and you can convince your family, can I carve out 50 acres to start doing this? Can we afford that I start healing the soil, crop rotation, eventually when I said to Scott, like, could you imagine using this as maybe an experimental place to figure out your question, how do I get off the merry-go-round? Could we use this piece for that? And he thought very deeply about it, but then came back and said, I just can't. He goes, I don't have the time. I would have to clean my equipment. To take this organic, I'd have to like hose everything down, just to stop the contamination. And so we very amicably parted ways. And then I got together with a young couple who is doing heritage grains, beans, hay. We when I looked at John and said we have 140 acres, now we're farmers. What are we going to do? I established 30 acres of pasture, and so we use 25 acres to rotationally graze cattle, which more closely there are a lot of benefits for the soil in doing that. I won't go into all that because I'm sure your audience probably knows. And then a smaller 6 acre field for rotationally grazing lamb. And then I do the aggressive gardening. So I'm canning and fermenting and brining and whatever, preserving food for myself and friends for a year at a time. And
Well, and
A
that
full-time job.
oh
And
my gosh.
what I'll say about that is I feel grateful that it's a full-time job, but it's also not a job in the, I want to be respectful that when most people talk about a job, they're talking about how they're putting money in the bank and building security. And, you know, John and I at this late stage in life are fortunate to have that financial security, right? So the I think the most respectful thing I can do is say I'm I've got the opportunity to look at this as a model, to understand how fucking hard it is
Mhm.
a gift, right? And then to build a place not unlike the church that gives access to young people that don't have access to land,
Mhm.
that I'm working with people that I'm learning from. I mean, just in leaps and bounds. Haley and John Webking, who own Meadowlark Organics, are just like unbelievable teachers. And, and maybe, I think that what I love the most about art, I'm really jumping around here, but what I love the most about the way I practice art is I never quite know what the end of the piece is. I don't know how the film ends or how it turns out or whether it loops or whether it's going to be good or bad or whatever. It just becomes this thing. And if I find any meaning it comes through hindsight from all the intuitive, serendipitous things that happen along the way. And it's like, oh, that's where the next cut goes. That's what the next image has to be. Like it answers itself until I think it's done. And then I look back later and I'm like, oh God, yeah, that's what that is. That's what that means. And there's a cynical way of looking at that to say, like, you're shooting from the hip. But there's a non-cynical way of saying, yeah, I'm shooting from the hip. And it's what I'm
I
living with the farm is like it's as close as I can get to getting out of the way of my ego or getting out of the clutches of my ego to say I don't know. And I think that's the scariest thing the ego can do is say, I don't know. I'm not sure. And so as I live with these bees and these wild birds and the things going on around me that maybe I'm influencing with pollinator gardens, maybe I'm influencing the survival of my bees that they don't have to really, bees don't go, they're smart. They don't go any farther than they need to forage. And
mm,
so the idea was if I create enough organic forage around them, would they be more resilient in the face of colony collapse? And jury's out. I've had winters where I can get my bees through, and then winters that I don't. And but all along the way, it's like giving up this idea of Descartes kind of, subject object relationship to the world, which we're all soaking in. And it's a way to live in which I can question, the idea that consciousness rising is in a human domain is really, it's just something that doesn't feel right about that to me.
mm,
And so that I think, and I don't know who's telling me this, but my sense, and when I'm really in the soil, when I'm really absorbed and I have no sense of time and I'm just doing the things, I feel very certain that consciousness rising absolutely will not come from humans.
mm,
I think that we sure as hell need to try and be
mm,
aware, but if there's a consciousness that we're becoming aware of, it's because it's always been here. We're
right.
not, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, I
I
do.
think that talking about human consciousness as though it's a thing separate from my bees is a huge mistake. I know that for a fact. I can say that factually. I just can't prove it.
Sure. Totally. I mean, it's my perception or belief, one or the other, that our bodies are gifts of the earth. We are
Hmm.
we are truly our bodies and our minds are, products of our recent existence and Descartes and a lot of things that I believe, it's really the unlearning and through the
Hmm.
functionality to earth and
Yeah.
nature and all the rest in which we
Yeah.
can, have our biggest learning. But I love that. And I think the inference of your relationship with the soil and with the natural world around you being your teacher and being able to help you move outside of, the current paradigm, maybe that's a little too overreaching, but
Well, it's
um,
I mean, it's a dance, right? Like the culture, the world, the forces that we each wake up to every morning in our day to day are really, really left brain heavy. It's language, it's calculus, it's all of that, right? And what's unnerving is that I mean, I kind of love hate AI. I mean, I love thinking about AI, and I, it's like, what do I know? But it seems to me it's in a real right brain mode right now, the way it's being developed. It's kind of exciting to think that there may be a moment where it develops itself, which is
mm,
fascinating. But right now, it's really being formed and monopolized by the culture we're in, and the toggling in it, learning the soil, learning the insects, learning the microbes, all the things that I'm learning right now. It's just toggling back and forth between intuition and then, it's like, is that true? And then, and then the left brain jumps in. It's like, prove it, prove it, prove it.
yeah.
And I love that. That's who we are as humans. We're absolutely curious creatures. And yet, at the end of the day, what's I feel like the only way forward on this planet that we've done so much harm to, um, is to recognize we need to find a way into that place that frankly psychedelics can take us in short order. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that comes from a mushroom or toad. And not that I'm well versed in that at all. I'm not, but it doesn't surprise me at all. A lot of the old or the very traditional ceremonies in indigenous cultures is absolutely revolving around a very close relationship to the earth.
Mhm.
Something so razor thin that it could kill you or elevate your consciousness, right?
One of
I
my
mean,
favorite
these are scary things.
100%. And one of my favorite quotes from an indigenous author, Arkan Lashwala, is thinking is listening.
Hmm.
And it's like that's really what I think like plant medicine and any relationality to the earth is it's enough, it's an allowance of that wisdom far, 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 far older and more experienced than any of our human beingness is, to come through and to allow the program and the paradigmatic belief structures to dissolve, you
Hmm.
know, and there's different levels to that, but also, yeah, it's this unlearning, and that is what I believe you're doing in community with your aggressive gardening and collaborators and the ag studio that you're working on. So I know our time is coming to an end shortly, but one thing I like to always ask at the end is sort of based on your unique sphere and your position and perspective, what do you sort of see as the highest possibilities for us and our future, and not meaning us humans, but our collective
Our
us.
collective. Yeah. Um, Here's what I think. I think that I hope that I'm grateful enough about kind of, by hook and by crook and, wrong turns and whatever. In my 60s, I've landed on this piece of earth that is a deep teacher. Um, what I hope for myself is that it can become more and more wild. I mean, it's just unbelievable how much I try to control this project. And it's so hard to let go of that. It's just like, and it's like, wow, and so I think that we collectively, to what you just said, to listen, right? To listen deeply. It's why it's so hard for me to explain to my closest friends even what it is I'm doing out in the garden for, 15 hours a day in the summer when, it's just like, if it's light, I'm out there. And even like your eyes adjust. So even when it's actually kind of completely dark, you can still be out there. It's amazing what you can see if you're there the whole time. And that's something. I mean, even that is something, right? The darkness, like, and so I don't know how we take these really, when you and I have talked a little wee bit about degrowth, and all I can say is as much creativity that went into the initial growth. And yeah, there's greed in there and there's all kinds of negative things. But ultimately, this thing that we're doing right now on Zoom is a massive creative endeavor. I mean, for God's sake, the harnessing of this math is insane. And yet, and it didn't happen overnight. And it was this accretive thing all along the way. And I think the creative problem we all face is creative. How do, with as much care and curiosity and creativity and serendipity and intuition that went into all the science that we now know and live in, how do we apply that same energy to, what we're calling and it's hard to call it degrowth because it sounds so just like, oh, it's just the opposite of growth then. But it's not. It's going to be another creative process to figure out how we edit this story. And that's really what it is. It's like we're editing a narrative that we take as truth. And frankly, the narrative is being invented every single second. And
It's
so did
always
that
remind,
answer your question? I don't have the answer, Marley.
yeah, I
I just
love
know
that
that
answer.
we can't know it because we're always just in the second we're inside of this thing.
I
Um,
love that answer. And it reminds me of Einstein's quote about not being able to solve the problem with the same thinking that you used to get into it.
sure.
And
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
like this idea of how do we creatively identify what is sufficient to us, not just convenient, and
Hmm.
how do we give the keys back to Mother Earth and Earth? I mean, Earth's ability to rehabilitate has been scientifically found to be beyond what we even can understand. So creatively, as human beings, kind of getting out of her way to
Hmm.
do the work and be in reciprocity, not as equals, but a little bit in
Yeah,
service, just in service to
yeah.
what she needs.
I want to say one last thing. So this recent, maybe your viewers don't know, but we find ourselves in the upper Midwest of Wisconsin, and we just had a spate of time where for 5 days, I think the highest temperature was -2 or, and then down to -15 at night, not counting the wind chill, which was down into the -40s. And that's really not comfortable for any living thing. It's just not comfortable. And yet the dark-eyed juncos and the downy woodpeckers and the flickers and they kept showing up. And I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing to survive this? Right. And so, I think that, we started this conversation talking about convenience in another conversation, convenience, right? Which is also really linked to comfort. And what we face going forward isn't going to feel comfortable. And it's not comfortable for me to have certain weeds in my perennial beds. And I'm just like, but again, that's something I'm fighting against. Like, it's not the weed. It's like, what's my discomfort around that? What
Mm,
makes me uncomfortable about this order that I think I am in? And
right.
how do we disrupt this order? And it's not going to be comfortable, and thank you, Al Gore, it's not going to be convenient, but it's something that has just incredible, the gifts I've gotten from just even asking that. And I live a very comfortable life and I have a lot of conveniences, but just being inside of that question makes me feel hopeful.
Mm, I love
That's
that,
that's what
Shell.
gives me hope. So,
I love that, Shell. And I would say that it's the depth of our discomfort in which we're able to go as
mhm.
the depth of our experience. Like the deeper you can get in there, the
It
deeper
becomes beautiful.
it's beautiful. It is
Yeah.
truly beautiful. Thank you for that. What a beautiful way to close. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. It wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it would be.
Yay.
It was fun. So,
Awesome.